Modern racing games are good. I'd even go as far as to say they're great. I mean, games like Forza are absolutely stunning masterpieces with gorgeous graphics, amazing soundtracks and beautiful cars. Hell, if you're willing to fork over the money to buy the stuff, you can pretty much even turn your gaming setup into a whole car simulator if that's what you really want. The developers put ridiculous amounts of care and detail into making sure that the game can be as close to real racing as possible. You know, for those of us that can't afford race cars, that is. And I don't blame you for thinking that we're currently living in the peak of racing video games. But to those of you blinded by hyper-realistic graphics and detailed car tuning, all accompanied by some incredible soundtracks, then that means you've probably forgotten racing's true gaming masterpiece. 2006's Cars, the movie, the video game. Okay, so actual name's just Cars, but it is in fact a game based on the Cars movies. And let me tell you why it's a great game. The game starts out with our hero, Lightning McQueen, dreaming about what I imagine pretty much every race car must dream about.
Morning, baby. My handsome man.
Wait, no, not that. Racing. He was dreaming about racing, and that's when we first get to experience the racing in the best racing game of all time. Except I didn't actually get to experience it, because much like most games on PC in the early 2000s, the PC port was kind of horrendous, and it didn't have controller functionality in mind. It also turns out that kids in the early 2000s must have had some incredible right hand stroke, because the keyboard layout was awkward as hell. So A, S and D, they're your action buttons basically, or what I'm going to call the action buttons. And they control things like boost, reverse and handbrake turns, which made me wonder how cars in this universe's handbrakes actually worked. Are they like organs, or are the cars more like automaton type creatures? Anyway, my curiosity on the car's anatomy aside, spacebar's your accelerator, and the left and right arrow keys are, well, your left and right. And can I just reiterate how much my right hand hurt from using the left and right arrow keys now? I don't know, I assume it was just me for being weak, but early 2000s PC gamers must have right hands of steel at this point. Once I figured out how to actually drive the car, the race, like pretty much most of the other races in the game, consisted of 3 laps against some of the other important characters from the movie. And a few borderline racist cars from England and Mexico. Can I just quickly point out that the English cars make all of the American cars look like absolute dumbasses? Every time the English cars would talk, the American cars would look at them like they were talking Botswanan or something, even though they're not really saying anything that overly complicated. Like, fine, okay, yeah, sure, the game's for kids. Kids probably wouldn't understand what's going on. Admittedly, there was maybe 1 or 2 times I didn't know what they were saying, but still, that's, 90% of that phrase is understandable. Rant aside, the driving controls like a shopping cart with locked wheels, and it took me forever to figure out the control layout, which meant my first few races were pretty much just me trying to figure out how the car worked properly, and it was tough, alright? However, once I eventually got hang of it, the races were actually kind of semi-enjoyable. The races weren't really that varied, and most of them were won with a comfortable 30-second lead, but they were still alright for a 16-year-old game that was meant for kids. The end goal of the game is to compete in piston cup races, which you do by completing every race in the chapter and then climbing up into Mac's lovely trailer and heading off to the races. Which also made me wonder, is it weird for Mac to have lightning crawl into his trailer, or is the trailer even part of Mac? Maybe it's like a backpack or something. Anyway, car anatomy aside, complete the chapter to compete in the piston cup. That's the gist of the game. And, much like NASCAR in the real world, the piston cup races are boring as hell. Except for when they suddenly get really erotic.
They're side by side as they come.
Other than the, eroticism aside, you drive around and round and round in circles in the same direction for 12 laps, stopping once to play a pit stop minigame, which I found awkward because it wasn't until now, actually writing the script, I actually figured out how the buttons were mapped to the keyboard. Anyway, that's it. The final climactic race that's been built up through this gigantic epic story is just that, 12 laps in an oval. Throughout the game you learn new abilities, if you can really call them that, like power sliding. There's a jump one as well, and there's also a boost, which doesn't actually feel like it does much other than give me violent motion sickness when it's first activated. And oh yeah, did I forget to mention the boost is actually a purple liquid that Lightning drinks that he gets from the hippie van. There's also a backwards race against Meta, which is the most pointless race in the whole game because every other ability you learn actually has, I guess, a point to learning it. It's actually useful in other races. Whereas the backwards race is pretty much the only one that actually has 0 real game use. which I feel makes sense given the fact that Meta teaches you it. And that leads me to my next reason that Cars is a great racing game. Variety. Games like Forza and Gran Turismo are known for having a great variety of cars, lorries, and even sometimes tractors. But so does Cars. I mean, sure, definitely not as varied, plus they can only be used in certain races or mini games, but there's the choice of Meta, the Italian one. The one that made me question if it was alright to find a car hot, and a classic one for all you classic lovers out there. Also, I'd like to point out that a lot of the stuff the Italian car says is quite stereotypical, and I'd like to say borderline racist. Also, as far as I can find out, the voice cast of the actual film did the voice acting in this game, which is pretty cool because that means that when Lightning McQueen says wow, it's a real Owen Wilson wow.
Wow.
However, like pretty much everything else in the game, the minigames quickly become pretty boring and repetitive. And because of the awkward controller layouts, they're tough to play. Completing certain races and minigames unlocks new areas of the open world map, which is neat, until you realise they're not actually as open world as they look. There's not really much to see there. Plus, sometimes what looks like drivable terrain isn't in fact drivable, but non-drivable looking terrain sometimes can be. Not only that, but driving into the smallest obstacles will send you veering wildly off course, which isn't too horrible in races because the game's out of bound reset is very generous, and I'm pretty sure that sometimes it even put me ahead of where I was. Towards the end of the game, I just zoned out and drove with zero regard for the out of bounds, because it had pretty much no consequences. Almost as if it really didn't actually need to be there to begin with, but I mean, I guess it's better than having invisible walls that you can drive into. Something else Cars has over pretty much every good modern racing game is a story. The game's kind of a sequel to the film in a way because it takes place just after the events of the movie, and Chick's the Piston Cup winner, Lightning's out in Radiator Springs training for the next season, but there's still this, you know, kind of like a unspoken love between them, which they sort of portray as a rivalry, but whatever. At one point, Chicks get sort of Lightning stuff stolen by those racers from the beginning of the film, but that's about it really, story-wise. There's nothing more than like this boring little rivalry and about 3 lines of exchanged dialogue between them. The game ends with you driving off into the sunset blasting early 2000s pop rock. Which reminds me, the game's soundtrack. I don't know where to start with it. It was all early 2000s pop rock, and there was literally only 5 songs, and they looped over and over and over and over and over. I probably can't play any of them because I assume that somehow they're copyrighted, but they sure did take some enduring. And I mean enduring. Towards the end, honestly, it could have just been my brain's way of coping, but some of the songs actually grew on me, and it could have just been my brain's way of coping. But I actually found myself humming one of them while I was making my dinner. I mean, it could have just been a form of Stockholm Syndrome after enduring the torture, but all of the enduring and torture led me down a strange path to a nostalgia that I never knew that I had. I never played this game as a kid, but playing it now at 23 years old, I can help but constantly be aware that this game wasn't made for me. It was made for 8-year-old me back in 2006. And I can help but feel like if it was me playing this game back then, on a Saturday morning with a bowl of unhealthily sugary cereal on a PS2, it would have been a game that I'd look back fondly on as an adult now. The game had a lot that 8-year-old me would have enjoyed. You know, charming characters straight from a film that I remember being quite good. Gameplay that, once you got the hang of it, was actually quite fun, and I'd imagine it probably would have been a lot more fun on a PS2. And cool looking cars. Everything a kid could possibly want. This whole comparison of the games with games like Forza and Gran Turismo was a joke, but wholeheartedly, as someone who played both of those games when I was younger, and as someone who loves cars in part because of them, I couldn't help but feel like this game did one thing better than those games ever will, and that's be memorable. I know that to a degree I'm comparing chalk with cheese, but at the end of the day I feel like these games are made with a similar mentality in mind, you know, at least back when they were first made. Give kids entertaining racing games. You know, that's the genuine true comparison that games like Gran Turismo, Forza, and Cars actually have. They wanted to make cars fun for kids. And I think they all succeeded tremendously in that. This video stemmed from me buying cars for real world money and needing an excuse to play it, which, I mean, I never would have if it wasn't for this video. And I don't regret it. As a 23-year-old playing a game that reminded me of my childhood in a weird way, it was enjoyable. And it's rare for me to actually have completed a game considering there's 13 games on my finished list and 69 in my unfinished list, which I do need to work on. Cars is by no means an incredible game by today's standards, but still one I'm glad to say I played nonetheless. And for the little money you can actually get it for and the short amount of time it takes to play, if you ever want a stupid game to piss about in, I don't see any reason not to play Cars. Anyway, you beautiful individuals, if you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to like and subscribe so I can carry on making these videos for you all. Thank you all for watching.